The gunshot that shattered the evening calm sent every bird in Sweetwater County scattering toward the darkening Wyoming sky, and Catherine Harlow knew in that instant her carefully constructed life had just ended along with her father's killer. She pressed herself against the rough planks of the general store, her silk traveling dress already dusty from 3 days on the stagecoach from Denver. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung in the air as shouts erupted from the saloon across the muddy street. Her father, Judge Nathaniel Harlow, had warned her not to come to Prospect Ridge. He had sent word that his circuit court duties would keep him away another month, but Catherine had been stubborn. At 22 years old, she had tired of waiting in her aunt's stuffy parlor, tired of the endless tea parties and marriage proposals from men who only wanted her father's influence and money. Now she stood frozen as men poured out of the saloon, their voices angry and confused. Someone was dead inside. Catherine gathered her skirts and moved toward the commotion, her heart hammering against her corset. She pushed through the crowd of unwashed miners and ranch hands, ignoring their protests, until she stood in the doorway and saw her father sprawled across a card table, blood blooming across his vest like a terrible flower. The scream that tore from her throat silenced every voice in the room. She rushed forward, but strong hands caught her shoulders, pulling her back. "Easy there, miss," a deep voice said. "You do not want to see him like this." Catherine twisted in the grip, her vision blurred with tears. "That is my father," she choked out. "Let me go to him." The hands released her immediately, and she stumbled to the table. Her father's eyes were open, staring at nothing. The town doctor was already there, shaking his head. "He is gone, miss. Shot clean through the heart. He would not have felt much." "Who did this?" Catherine demanded, her voice raw. "Catherine?" She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every man present. Most looked away. "Who killed my father?" An older man with a sheriff's badge stepped forward, his expression grim. "Man named Cole Brennan. He rode out 10 minutes before you arrived. Your father was about to sentence him tomorrow for cattle rustling. Looks like Brennan decided to pass his own sentence first." Catherine felt the room tilt. She reached out blindly, and those same strong hands steadied her again. "I have got you," the voice said quietly. "Sheriff, this lady needs somewhere to sit." "Bring her to my office," the sheriff said, but Catherine shook her head violently. "No, I need to stay with my father. I need to." But she did not know what she needed. The world had become unrecognizable in the span of 5 minutes. The next hours passed in a fog. The undertaker came. Arrangements were made. The sheriff asked questions Catherine could barely answer. Through it all, the man who had caught her remained nearby, a silent presence she found oddly comforting. When she finally looked at him properly, she saw a lean cowboy in his mid-20s with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of winter sage. He had removed his hat inside the sheriff's office, revealing dark hair that needed cutting. "Thank you," Catherine said when they were finally alone, the sheriff having left to organize a posse. "I did not catch your name." "James Cordell, ma'am. I work at the Three Rivers Ranch, about 5 miles east of here. I'm real sorry about your father. He was a good man, a fair man. You knew him? He heard a case between our ranch and a neighboring spread last year, settled it without bloodshed, which is more than most could have done." James turned his hat in his hands. "Miss Harlow, do you have somewhere to stay? Your father, he had rooms at the boarding house, but a young woman cannot stay in a dead man's rooms without causing talk," Catherine finished bitterly. "Yes, I understand how these things work." She stood swaying slightly. She had not eaten since dawn, and shock was giving way to exhaustion. "I will find somewhere. Perhaps the boarding house has another room." James's expression turned doubtful. "Miss Harlow, I do not think you understand. Prospect Ridge is not like Denver. We have got one boarding house, and it is full up with miners working the new silver claim. The hotel burned down last winter. There is nowhere decent for a lady." Catherine stared at him. "Then where am I supposed to go? I cannot leave. I have to bury my father. I have to—" Her voice cracked. The livery stable has a loft, James said carefully. It is clean hay, and old Pete who runs it is honest. He would not bother you. You are suggesting I sleep in a stable? Catherine's voice rose despite her exhaustion. Like livestock? I am suggesting you sleep somewhere safe and dry, James said, his tone gentle but firm. This is not the city, Miss Harlow. Prospect Ridge is a hard town. Half the men here have not seen a respectable woman in months. You show up at the saloon or try to sleep rough, and I cannot guarantee your safety, no matter how much your father was respected. The truth of his words settled over Catherine like a cold blanket. She was alone in a frontier town with no family, no friends, and apparently no options. She thought of the jewelry in her traveling bag, the money sewn into the lining of her cloak. In Denver, she had been somebody. Here, she was just another vulnerable woman in a place where the law died with the man who had upheld it. The stable, then, she said quietly. James nodded. I will take you there. And Miss Harlow, I will bed down outside if you're agreeable to it, just to make sure nobody gets ideas. Catherine wanted to protest, to insist she did not need a stranger's protection, but the words died in her throat. The frontier had already taught her a harsh lesson about pride. That would be kind of you, Mr. Cordell. The livery stable smelled of horses and leather and hay. Old Pete, a grizzled man with more beard than face, showed Catherine to the loft with surprising courtesy. Someone had swept it recently, and the hay was fresh and golden. A horse blanket served as a makeshift curtain for privacy. It was primitive and humbling, but Catherine was too exhausted to care. She climbed the ladder in her ruined silk dress and collapsed into the hay. Through the gaps in the boards, she could see stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere below, she heard James speaking quietly to Pete, heard the jingle of coins changing hands. Then James's voice rose slightly, addressing her. I will be right outside the door, Miss Harlow. You need anything, you just call out. Catherine closed her eyes, tears sliding hot down her temples. This morning she had been excited about surprising her father, about finally seeing the frontier territories he wrote about in his letters. Now he was dead, and she was sleeping in a hayloft with a cowboy she did not know standing guard over her virtue like some character from a dime novel. Sleep should have been impossible, but grief and exhaustion pulled her under like a riptide. She dreamed of her father teaching her to read legal briefs, of his laugh when she challenged his rulings at the dinner table, of the pride in his eyes when she graduated from Miss Porter's school. She dreamed of gunshots and blood and being utterly alone. When dawnlight filtered through the stable boards, Catherine woke with hay in her hair and the certain knowledge that her old life was gone forever. She climbed down the ladder carefully, her muscles stiff and protesting. James was outside just as he had promised, sitting with his back against the stable wall, his rifle across his knees. He looked up when she emerged, his eyes red-rimmed with tiredness. You did not sleep, Catherine said. I dozed some. James stood, stretching. Miss Harlow, I need to head back to Three Rivers. I have got work, and the foreman does not take kindly to hands who disappear. But before I go, I want you to consider something. Catherine waited, wrapping her arms around herself against the morning chill. My cabin, James said. It is small, just one room, really. But it has got a good door with a lock. I can bunk in the ranch house with the other hands. You would be safe there, private. No one would bother you, and it is a sight better than sleeping in hay. Catherine stared at him. You would give up your home for me? A stranger? Your father gave my boss a fair ruling when he could have bankrupted us, James said simply. And you are alone in a hard place. It is the right thing to do. He paused. I will not lie to you, Miss Harlow. People will talk. They will say things that are not true about why you are in my cabin, but talk is just noise. Your safety is real. Catherine thought of another night in the hayloft, of the miners who had stared at her yesterday, of how vulnerable she felt in this wild place. Why are you doing this? James met her eyes steadily. Because someone should. Because your father deserves to have his daughter treated with respect. because it is what decent people do. He shifted his weight. You do not have to decide now. I will be back this evening after work. You think on it. He left her with $3 silver for food and a promise to return. Catherine watched him ride east toward the rising sun, wondering if she would ever see him or her money again. But when evening came and the shadows grew long, James appeared on a rangy bay horse, looking bone-tired but determined. "Have you thought on my offer?" he asked. Catherine had spent the day making arrangements for her father's funeral, fending off inappropriate condolences from men who stood too close, and realizing just how few options an unmarried woman had in Prospect Ridge. "I have. If you are certain it would not be an imposition, I accept your generosity, Mr. Cordell." "It is no imposition." James's relief was visible. "And please call me James. We are going to be neighbors in a manner of speaking." The ride to Three Rivers Ranch took 40 minutes through rolling grassland dotted with cattle. The land here was beautiful, in a stark, endless way that made Catherine's chest tight. She rode behind James on his horse, acutely aware of how improper this would seem in Denver, how utterly necessary it was here. James's cabin sat at the edge of the ranch property, a simple structure of logs and river stone with a sod roof. Inside it was spare but clean. A narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, a stone fireplace, shelves holding a few books and supplies. A single window looked out toward distant mountains. "It is not much," James said, sounding almost apologetic. "It has walls and a door," Catherine replied. "After last night, that seems like luxury." James showed her where he kept food, firewood, and a spare rifle. "You know how to shoot?" "My father taught me." Catherine touched the rifle barrel. "He said a woman who could read law and shoot straight would never be helpless." He was right about that. James picked up a bedroll from the corner. "I will be in the bunkhouse if you need me. It is the long building near the main house. You cannot miss it. I will come by tomorrow after work. Make sure you have everything you need." After he left, Catherine sat at the small table and let herself cry properly for the first time. Great, shaking sobs that hurt her chest and made her eyes swell. She cried for her father, for her lost innocence about what the world was really like, for the terror of being alone. When the tears finally stopped, she felt hollowed out, but strangely clearer. She had 2 choices: collapse under the weight of tragedy or survive it. Her father had not raised a woman who collapsed. The funeral was held 3 days later under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Half the town came. Whether out of respect or curiosity, Catherine could not tell. The circuit preacher said words that were probably meant to be comforting. Catherine stood dry-eyed in her black mourning dress, feeling like she was watching the scene from a great distance. James attended, standing at the back with his hat in his hands. Several other ranch hands from Three Rivers came too, their presence a silent show of support. When it was over and the grave was filled, James approached her carefully. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I am standing," Catherine said. "That is the best I can manage right now." "That is enough!" James glanced around at the dispersing crowd. "Miss Harlow, I should tell you something. The sheriff caught up with Cole Brennan. There was a gunfight. Brennan is dead." Catherine absorbed this news with a strange numbness. "Am I supposed to feel better? Because I do not." "No, I do not suppose you do. Revenge is cold comfort." James paused. "But it means you are safe. No one will come after you because of what your father did. That is worth something." Over the following weeks, a strange routine developed. James worked from dawn to dusk at the ranch, then stopped by the cabin each evening. At first, he would just check that Catherine had what she needed, staying only a few minutes before heading to the bunkhouse. But gradually, his visits grew longer. Catherine would have coffee waiting, and they would sit at the small table and talk while the sun set. She learned that James was 25, that he had come west from Missouri after his parents died of cholera, that he had been working ranches since he was 16. He was saving money to buy his own land someday, a small spread where he could run cattle, and maybe plant some crops. He read poetry when he could get his hands on it, which surprised Catherine until she saw the worn volume of Whitman on his shelf. "I thought cowboys only read dime novels," she teased one evening, holding up the book. "Some do. I like words that mean something more than just bullets and bandits." James poured more coffee. "What about you? What did you do back in Denver besides cause trouble?" "I most certainly did not cause trouble," Catherine protested, but she was smiling for the first time in weeks. "I taught at a school for girls, literature and history. My father wanted me to marry a lawyer or a banker, but I wanted to work, to matter." "Teaching matters," James said, "maybe more than law or banking." Their conversations ranged across everything and nothing: books, politics, the nature of justice, the best way to cook beans, whether the frontier would ever truly be civilized. Catherine found herself looking forward to these evenings more than she wanted to admit. James had a quiet intelligence and a gentleness that surprised her. He never presumed on their arrangement, never made her feel uncomfortable or unsafe. True to his word, he guarded her honor as carefully as if she were his own sister. But Catherine was beginning to realize she did not want him to see her as a sister. It happened gradually, like spring coming to the high plains. She noticed the way lamplight caught in his dark hair, the strength in his hands when he chopped firewood for her, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. She noticed how he listened when she talked, really listened, like her words mattered. She noticed the careful distance he maintained, the way he never touched her except to help her down from a horse, and she found herself wishing he would be less careful. "I am being ridiculous," she told herself firmly one night after James had left. "He is being kind because of father, that is all." But her heart was not listening to reason anymore. The first snow came in late October, dusting the grasslands white. Catherine woke to find the cabin blessedly warm. Someone had stoked the fire during the night. When she opened the door, she found James asleep on the porch, wrapped in his bedroll, covered in a thin layer of snow. "What are you doing?" she demanded, shaking his shoulder. "James, wake up. You will freeze to death." He sat up, blinking groggily. The temperature dropped. "I wanted to make sure the fire stayed going." "By sleeping on the porch? In the snow?" Catherine could not decide if she was angry or touched. "Get inside before you lose a toe to frostbite." "I cannot. It would not be proper." Even half-frozen, James was worried about her reputation. "Proper?" Catherine's voice rose. "You have been sleeping in the bunkhouse while I take your cabin. You have spent every evening keeping me company and making sure I do not fall apart. You have guarded my honor so carefully that half the ranch thinks you are a saint. And now you are going to freeze to death out of propriety? Get inside." James hesitated, then trudged into the cabin, snow falling from his coat. Catherine pushed him toward the fireplace and threw another log on the flames. "Sit, I am making you coffee." "Miss Harlow." "Catherine," she interrupted. "After everything, I think you can call me Catherine." "Catherine." He said her name carefully, like it was something precious. "I do not want people to get the wrong idea about you. I do not care what people think anymore." Catherine handed him a steaming cup. "In Denver, I cared desperately. I worried about every glance, every whisper. But my father is dead, and I am living in a cowboy's cabin in the middle of nowhere, and I have learned something important. The opinions of strangers do not keep you warm at night. Kindness does. Decency does." She met his eyes. "You do?" James was very still. "Catherine, you have been through a terrible thing. You are not thinking clearly." "I am thinking more clearly than I have in years." She sat down across from him. "I see you, James Cordell. I see what you have done for me, who you are. And I want you to stop sleeping in a bunkhouse with 20 other men. This is your cabin. You should be here. I cannot ask you to leave. You have nowhere to go." "I am not suggesting I leave." Catherine's heart was hammering, but she forced herself to continue. I am suggesting we share the space. You take the bed, I will take the floor by the fire, or we can take turns. We can figure it out. But I will not have you freezing on my conscience." "People will talk," James warned. "Let them talk." Catherine surprised herself with her own fierceness. "I am done letting fear of gossip dictate my life." So James moved back into his own cabin, and they navigated the strange intimacy of shared space. James insisted Catherine keep the bed while he slept by the fire. They developed careful routines. James would wait outside while Catherine dressed in the mornings. Catherine would busy herself with cooking while James changed after work. It should have been awkward, but instead it felt strangely natural, like they had been doing this for years instead of weeks. The ranch foreman, a gruff man named Hollis, confronted James one morning in the barn. Catherine had ridden over to return a book to the ranch house library, and she heard their raised voices. "You are playing with fire, Cordell," Hollis said. "That girl is quality, Judge's daughter. You think her family is going to let some drifting cowboy ruin her reputation?" "I have not ruined anything," James replied, his voice tight with anger. "I have done nothing but try to help her." "Then help her by finding her a proper place to stay. The Widow Thompson would take her in." "Widow Thompson drinks laudanum like water and has strange men visiting all hours. You want to send Catherine there?" "Catherine, is it? You're on first names now?" Hollis's tone turned ugly. "Boy, you are forgetting your place. That woman is so far above you, she might as well be on the moon." Catherine stepped into the barn, her cheeks burning. "Excuse me, Mr. Hollis, but I believe I can speak for myself." Both men turned, startled. James has been nothing but a gentleman. He gave up his home and his comfort to help a stranger in need. If you find that suspicious, then perhaps you should examine your own character, because clearly you cannot imagine someone acting with pure motives. Hollis's face reddened. "Miss Harlow, I meant no disrespect, but people are talking. It reflects badly on the ranch." "Then perhaps you should spend less time listening to gossip and more time recognizing good men when you employ them." Catherine turned to James. "I came to return a book. Are you ready to ride back?" They rode in silence for several minutes before James spoke. "You did not have to do that. Stand up for me to Hollis?" "Yes, I did. He was being unfair." Catherine glanced at him. "James, do you regret helping me? If you do, I will understand. I can try to find somewhere else." "No." The word was fierce. "I do not regret anything, but Hollis is right about one thing. You are quality, Catherine. You should be in a fine house with servants and a carriage, not living in a one-room cabin with a cowboy who smells like horses." "I like how you smell," Catherine said before she could stop herself. Then she blushed furiously. "I mean, you do not smell bad. I mean—" She stopped, mortified. James was staring at her with an expression she could not read. "Catherine, forget I said anything. I am tired and not making sense." But her heart was racing, and she could not look at him. When they reached the cabin, James helped her down from her horse. His hands lingered on her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Catherine, I need to say something, and I need you to listen." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "I think you are the finest person I have ever met. You are smart and brave and kinder than you have any reason to be after what you have been through. And every day I have to remind myself that I'm just a ranch hand, and you are a judge's daughter. Because if I forget that for even a minute, I will do something foolish like fall in love with you." He took a breath. "But I think I might be doing that anyway, and I do not know how to stop." Catherine felt like the world had tilted. "What if I do not want you to stop?" "You do not know what you are saying." "Stop telling me what I know." Catherine put her hand on his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her palm. "I am not a child. I am not confused. I know my own mind, and I know that somewhere between the hayloft and this cabin I fell for a cowboy who reads poetry and guards my honor and sees me as more than just my father's daughter. Catherine, I have got nothing to offer you, no land, no money, no future. You have yourself. That is more than enough." She looked up at him, willing him to understand. "I do not care about money or status. I thought I did once, but that was before I learned what really matters. James, you have given me safety when I had none, friendship when I was alone, respect when I was vulnerable. You have given me everything that counts." James cupped her face in his calloused hands. "If I kiss you right now, I am not going to be able to walk away. You understand that?" "Then do not walk away," Catherine whispered. His kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, like he was afraid she might disappear. But when Catherine pressed closer, her hands fisting in his shirt, the kiss deepened into something that felt like a promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, James rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said quietly. "I probably loved you from the moment you stood up in that saloon and demanded justice for your father. But I'm going to do this right. I'm going to court you proper. And when I ask you to marry me, I will have something to offer besides a borrowed cabin." "You already have everything I want," Catherine said, but she was smiling. "But I will let you court me if it makes you happy." "It does. You make me happy." James kissed her again, softer this time. "You make me believe in things I stopped believing in a long time ago." The courting that followed was unlike anything Catherine had experienced in Denver. There were no fancy dinners or theater performances, no chaperones or calling cards. Instead, James took her riding across the ranch land, showing her his favorite places: a creek where willows trailed in the water, a hilltop where you could see for miles, a meadow where wildflowers would bloom in spring. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing, building a foundation of friendship beneath the growing love. On Sundays, James's only day off, they would pack a lunch and spend the day exploring. He taught her to ride better, to read the weather in the clouds, to tell north by the stars. She read poetry to him and told him stories about her father, slowly healing from her grief through the act of remembering. The ranch hands gradually accepted their relationship. A few made crude jokes at first, but James's steady dignity and Catherine's obvious respectability silenced most criticism. The other cowboys started tipping their hats when they saw Catherine, addressing her politely. She became a kind of unofficial mascot at Three Rivers, the woman who had tamed their most solitary colleague. Winter deepened, and the cabin became a warm sanctuary against the cold. They would sit by the fire in the evenings, James whittling or mending tack while Catherine read or sewed. Sometimes she would lean against him, his arm around her shoulders, and they would simply exist together in comfortable silence. The physical distance they had maintained at first slowly closed as their relationship deepened. James would kiss her goodnight before reluctantly heading to his bedroll by the fire. Catherine would lie awake, wishing propriety allowed for more, but understanding why James insisted on maintaining boundaries. "I respect you too much to compromise you," he said one night when she protested his cautiousness. "When we marry, and we will marry, I want you to walk down that aisle with your head high, knowing we did things honorably." "You are an impossible man," Catherine said, but she loved him more for it. In late December, a letter arrived from Catherine's aunt in Denver. Someone had finally tracked down her whereabouts and informed her relatives of the judge's death. The letter was full of shock and demands that Catherine return immediately. Her aunt had lined up several suitable marriage prospects, men of good family and financial standing who would help Catherine recover from her ordeal. Catherine read the letter aloud to James, then tossed it into the fire. "I am not going back. Catherine, you should at least consider it." James looked pained. "Your aunt is right that you deserve better than this. A real home, security, society. I have a real home right here." Catherine took his hands. "James, I do not want to go back to Denver, to that suffocating life where women are decorative and silent. I want to be here with you, in this impossible cabin where I am more myself than I have ever been." "What about your teaching? You love teaching." "I did. And maybe someday Prospect Ridge will have enough children for a school and I can teach again. But even if it does not, I will have you. That is enough." James pulled her into his arms. "I do not deserve you." "You deserve everything good," Catherine said fiercely, "and I am going to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." On Christmas Eve, James took Catherine to the main ranch house where the owner, Mr. Garrett, was hosting a small gathering. Catherine had met him briefly at the funeral, but had not spoken to him since. He was a stern-faced man in his 60s, successful and respected throughout the territory. "Miss Harlow," Garrett said, shaking her hand, "I am glad you could come. I wanted to speak with you privately, if I may." They stepped into his study, and Catherine felt a flutter of nervousness. Was he going to ask her to leave the ranch? "Miss Harlow, James Cordell is one of the best men I have ever employed," Garrett began. "Hardworking, honest, smart. But more importantly, he is decent. The kind of man the frontier needs more of." He paused. "He came to me last week and asked for an advance on his wages, a significant advance. When I asked why, he said he wanted to buy land, to have something to offer the woman he loved." Catherine's breath caught. "I gave him the advance," Garrett continued, "but I did more than that. I have got a section of land about 10 miles north of here, good grazing land with a creek. I've been holding on to it for years, not sure what to do with it. I am going to sell it to James for a price he can afford with generous terms. He can run cattle on it, build it up slowly while still working here. In a few years, he will have a proper ranch." "Mr. Garrett, that is incredibly generous. It is good business. I would rather have James as a neighbor than a stranger. And frankly, Miss Harlow, this territory needs more people like you and James, people with education and principles and courage." He smiled slightly. "Your father would have approved, I think." Catherine had to blink back tears. He would have. "Thank you, Mr. Garrett. Thank you so much." When they returned to the gathering, James was waiting anxiously. Catherine went to him, taking his hands in front of everyone. "Mr. Garrett told me about the land. James, you should have said something." "I wanted to surprise you. I was going to ask you properly on Christmas Day when I could tell you I had something real to offer." James glanced around at the assembled ranch hands and their wives, then seemed to make a decision. He dropped to one knee right there in the parlor, pulling a simple gold band from his pocket. "Catherine Harlow, I love you more than I thought I could ever love anyone. I do not have much yet, but I have got land now, and a future, and a heart that is entirely yours if you will have it. Will you marry me?" Catherine could barely see through her tears. "Yes, yes, of course I will marry you." The room erupted in cheers and applause. James stood and kissed her while the cowboys whistled and stomped their approval. It was perfect, Catherine thought. Not the elegant proposal she might have once imagined in a Denver drawing room, but something better, real and honest, and witnessed by people who mattered. They were married on a cold January morning in 1884 in the small church at Prospect Ridge. Catherine wore a simple dress made by the ranch cook, who turned out to be a talented seamstress. James wore his best clothes, his hair freshly cut, his eyes never leaving Catherine's face as she walked down the aisle alone. She wished her father could be there, but in a way she felt his presence, his approval of the man she had chosen. The same circuit preacher who had buried her father now joined them in marriage. Catherine spoke her vows clearly, meaning every word. James's voice was steady, his hands warm as he slipped the ring onto her finger. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed her like it was a vow in itself, a promise of forever. The ranch hands threw a celebration that lasted well into the night. There was music and dancing, food and laughter. Catherine danced with her new husband, with Mr. Garrett, with ranch hands who had once been strangers. She felt welcomed, accepted, home in a way she had never felt in Denver. When they finally returned to the cabin, now truly theirs together, James carried her over the threshold. Inside, someone had left wildflowers on the table despite the winter cold, a blessing for their marriage bed. James set Catherine down gently, his hands cupping her face. "Are you happy?" he asked. "I am home," Catherine said, and kissed her husband. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, a natural progression of the love they had been building for months. Afterward, lying in James's arms in the narrow bed, Catherine marveled at how completely her life had transformed. 6 months ago, she had been a teacher in Denver, comfortable and conventional. Now she was a rancher's wife on the Wyoming frontier, and she had never felt more alive. The winter passed in a haze of happiness. James continued working at Three Rivers while beginning to improve their new land. On weekends, they would ride out together, planning where to build the house, where to put corrals, how to use the land best. Catherine threw herself into learning everything about ranching. She read every book she could find, asked endless questions, and proved to have a natural head for the business side of things. "You should handle our accounts," James said one evening after watching her reorganize his chaotic financial records. "You are better at figures than I am." "We are partners," Catherine said. "We will each do what we do best." Spring came late, but glorious. The prairie exploding with wildflowers. James and Catherine worked side by side, building the fence, clearing brush, preparing for their first cattle purchase. It was back-breaking work, but Catherine loved it. She loved the physical exhaustion, the visible progress, the feeling of building something real with her own hands. In May, Catherine realized she was pregnant. She told James one evening after supper, watching his face cycle through shock, joy, and worry in rapid succession. "A baby," he breathed. "Catherine, we are going to have a baby." Then, worry won. "But you have been working so hard, the fence building, the riding, is it safe?" "Women have been having babies on the frontier since there was a frontier," Catherine said, amused. "I will be careful, but I'm not going to stop living. This baby is going to be raised by 2 working parents. He or she might as well get used to it now." He or she. James put his hand on her still flat belly, wonder in his eyes. "Our child." "Our future," Catherine agreed. The pregnancy was easier than Catherine had feared. She tired more quickly and had to stop the heaviest work, but she still helped with what she could. The ranch community rallied around them. The women shared advice and baby clothes. The men helped James with the heavier work on their land. By summer, they had broken ground on a house, a simple 2-room structure that would be home until they could afford to expand. In late September, Catherine went into labor. The ranch cook, who had helped deliver dozens of babies, attended her along with the doctor from Prospect Ridge. James paced outside, driving the other ranch hands crazy with his anxiety. When the baby's first cry split the air, James burst into the cabin despite protests. "A boy," the cook announced, handing James his son. "Healthy lungs on this one." James stared at the tiny red-faced creature in his arms, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Hello, little man. I am your father, and I'm going to love you every day of your life." They named him Nathaniel James Cordell, for Catherine's father and his own. Little Nate, as he became known, was a good baby, healthy and alert. Catherine recovered quickly from the birth, eager to get back to work. They moved into the new house when Nate was 6 weeks old, a milestone that felt monumental. "Our own home," Catherine said, standing in the empty main room with Nate in her arms. "Our own land, our own family. James, we did it." "You did it," James said, wrapping his arms around them both. "You took a tragedy and turned it into this. You are the strongest person I know." "We are strong together," Catherine corrected. "That is what matters." The years that followed were hard but good. The ranch slowly grew. They added more cattle, improved the land, built a barn and proper corrals. Catherine's head for business proved invaluable. She negotiated better prices for their cattle, managed their finances, and even started teaching the ranch children in their cabin during winter months. James worked tirelessly, building their dream one fence post at a time. 2 years after Nate was born, Catherine gave birth to twin girls they named Sarah and Grace. The cabin overflowed with children and laughter and chaos. James expanded the house, adding 2 more rooms. Catherine learned to manage a household and a business simultaneously, somehow finding time for teaching, ranching, and motherhood. The children grew up wild and free, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with ranch chores as soon as they were able. Catherine taught them to read and write, to think critically and question injustice. James taught them about the land, about animals, about honor and hard work. Together they raised children who were confident, capable, and kind. Prospect Ridge grew too. More families came, drawn by the promise of land and opportunity. A proper school was built, and Catherine became its first official teacher. She taught during the school months, ranched during the summer, and somehow made it all work. James became known as one of the most successful ranchers in the county, respected for his fairness and intelligence. On their 10th anniversary, James took Catherine riding to the hilltop where he had first told her he loved her. The children were safely with the ranch cook, and they had the whole day to themselves. They sat on the hillside, Catherine leaning back against James, looking out over land that was finally truly theirs. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked. "Giving up your old life for this?" "Never." Catherine turned to kiss him. "This is real, James. This matters. Everything else was just waiting for this to begin. I love you, Catherine Cordell. I loved you when you were sleeping in haystacks, and I love you now when we are ranchers and parents and everything I dreamed we could be. I love you too." Catherine traced the lines around his eyes, earned from years of sun and hard work. "You gave me more than a cabin and your protection. You gave me a future, a family, a purpose. You gave me myself." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Below them, their ranch spread across the valley, their cattle dotting the hillsides, smoke rising from their chimney where their children waited. It was not the life Catherine had planned, not the future anyone would have predicted that terrible day when her father died. It was better. As they rode home through the twilight, Catherine thought about the frightened woman she had been, sleeping in a hayloft because she had nowhere else to go. She thought about the cowboy who had offered his cabin and his protection, asking nothing in return. She thought about how tragedy had led to love, how loss had led to finding exactly what she needed. "Thank you," she said suddenly. James glanced back at her. "For what?" "For seeing me when I was lost, for giving me a place to land, for loving me enough to guard my honor even when it would have been easier not to. Catherine, I would do it all again in a heartbeat. You are my heart." James reached back to squeeze her hand. "You and the children. This life we built together, it is everything I never knew I wanted." When they reached the house, their children poured out to meet them, Nate carrying Grace while Sarah ran ahead. Catherine dismounted and caught Sarah up in her arms, breathing in the scent of her daughter's hair. James lifted Nate and Grace, making them shriek with laughter. They walked into the house together, a family complete and whole. That night, after the children were asleep, Catherine and James sat on their porch in the rocking chairs he had built. The stars were brilliant overhead, undimmed by city lights. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly. The night air smelled of sage and grass and home. "What are you thinking, Mar?" James asked, reaching for her hand. "I am thinking about honor," Catherine said, "about how you protected mine when I was vulnerable, how you gave without expecting anything back. And I am thinking about how that honor, that decency, is what I want our children to learn. Not from books, though those matter too, but from watching us, watching how we treat each other and build this life together." "You make me better than I am," James said quietly. "No, I see what you are. There is a difference." Catherine squeezed his hand. "And what you are is good, James Cordell. Good and true and everything I want our children to be." They rocked in comfortable silence, hands linked, hearts aligned. The frontier could be harsh and unforgiving, but it could also be beautiful and full of possibility. Catherine had learned that the hard way, through grief and loss and fear, but she had also learned about resilience and love and the surprising grace of strangers who became family. A decade had passed since that terrible night in Prospect Ridge, since the judge's daughter found herself sleeping in haystacks with nowhere to turn, but a cowboy had offered his cabin, had stood guard over her honor when no one would have blamed him for doing less, and that single act of decency had changed everything. From tragedy came love, from fear came courage, from a borrowed cabin came a ranch, a family, a future bright with promise. Catherine looked at her husband, at the home they had built, at the life they were creating together, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Years later, when their children asked how their parents had met, Catherine would tell them the truth about a father's death, about sleeping in haystacks, about a cowboy who offered shelter and asked for nothing in return. She would tell them about honor and decency and the kind of love that grows from friendship and respect. And James would always add, "Your mother gave up everything familiar for a life out here with me. She chose love over comfort, adventure over security. She is the bravest person I have ever known." The children would roll their eyes at their parents' sentimentality, but they understood the lesson beneath the story, that real love required courage, that honor mattered more than convenience, that the best things in life were worth fighting for. Catherine and James grew old together on their ranch, watching their children grow and eventually start families of their own. Nate became a lawyer like his grandfather, bringing justice to the frontier territories. Sarah married a rancher and expanded the family holdings. Grace became a doctor, one of the first female physicians in Wyoming, carrying on her parents' legacy of defying convention. Through all the years, through hardship and triumph, through the evolution of the West from wild frontier to settled territory, Catherine and James remained devoted to each other. Their love, forged in crisis and tempered by hard work, proved strong enough to weather anything. On their 50th anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and the entire community they had helped build, Catherine looked at her husband and saw the young cowboy who had offered his cabin and his protection when she had nowhere else to turn. And James looked at his wife and saw the brave woman who had chosen him over everything else she had known. "I would do it all again," Catherine said, echoing the words they had spoken so many times over the years. "Every hard moment, every struggle, it all led here to you, to this." "As would I," James replied, taking her hand. "You are my greatest adventure, Catherine Cordell. You always have been." They kissed. To the cheers of their family, two people who had found each other in the darkest moment and built something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. The judge's daughter and the cowboy, partners in every sense of the word, proof that love could bloom even in the harshest soil when tended by honor, respect, and unwavering devotion. Their story became legend in Prospect Ridge, told and retold until it took on mythic qualities. But at its heart was a simple truth: that kindness mattered, that decency could change lives, that love built on a foundation of honor would last forever. And in the cabin that James had first offered to a desperate stranger, now preserved as part of their expanded ranch house, Catherine and James spent their final years together. They would sit in the rocking chairs on the porch, watching the sun set over land they had tamed and nurtured, remembering the journey that had brought them together. "Do you remember?" Catherine would ask, and James always knew what she meant. "I remember a brave woman who demanded justice for her father. I remember thinking I had never seen anyone so fierce or so lost. I remember knowing I had to help even though I had no idea how much you would change my life. I remember a cowboy who gave up his home for a stranger, who stood guard all night to protect my honor, who saw me not as a burden, but as someone worth saving." Catherine would lean her head on his shoulder. "I remember falling in love without meaning to, without wanting to, until suddenly I could not imagine my life without you. Best decision I ever made," James would say, kissing the top of her head, "offering you that cabin. Best decision I ever made," Catherine would reply, "was accepting." And there, in the golden light of sunset, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and love well earned, they would sit in perfect contentment. The judge's daughter, who had once slept in haystacks, and the cowboy who had offered his cabin and guarded her honor true, had built more than a ranch or a family. They had built a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone, a testament to the power of kindness in a hard world and proof that sometimes the most unlikely meetings led to the most extraordinary love stories. Their love had started with shelter and protection, with one person extending a hand to another in need, but it had grown into something vast and unshakable, a love that transformed them both and rippled outward to touch everyone around them. It was the kind of love that made the world better, that gave others hope, that proved beyond any doubt that honor and decency and genuine goodness still existed even in the wildest places. And when Catherine and James finally passed, within days of each other, as if neither could bear to be apart, they were laid to rest on the hilltop where James had first confessed his love, overlooking the ranch they had built together. Their story lived on through their children and grandchildren, through the school Catherine had founded and the community they had helped create, through every life they had touched with their kindness and courage. The judge's daughter and the cowboy, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would never be forgotten. It was a story of honor, of sacrifice, of the kind of true love that only grows stronger with time. And it all began with a simple act of decency, a cabin offered, an honor guarded, and two hearts that found their home in each other.